So a bit of a themed one, this one. You might have seen things on the news and it was sort of debatable as to whether or not I'd do a video today, but here we go. Now, the Formula 1 World Championship kicked off 72 years ago, and a lot of the stuff from those early races is quite interesting, if you can actually find information about those races. So today I thought I'd go right back to the beginning and look at the first ever World Championship race at Silverstone in 1950. The official name for the event was the Royal Automobile Club Grand Prix d'Europe, incorporating the British Grand Prix, a very long name, which would be the first of 7 official races contributing to the 1950 World Championship of Drivers, which we know now as the Formula 1 World Drivers' Championship. And it would be the start of the worldwide racing series that today is a multi-billion-dollar business, rivalled only by a select few sports. But Formula 1 as a sport was still only a relatively new thing, a series formed just after the Second World War for the Turin Grand Prix, which, like a lot of early post-war racing series in Europe, was dominated by the Italians. The first Formula 1 race was in 1946, and then in 1949 the FIA announced that this Formula 1, the top-level racing category, would have its own championship, sanctioned by the FIA rather than a regional governing body. Now, the location selected for this first World Championship race was a place that just 5 years prior to this race taking place was an RAF base, specifically RAF Silverstone, a Royal Air Force airfield that was used to train Wellington bomber pilots before they went over into Europe and started, seeing who Mr. Hitler was really kidding. That's a banger of a song, by the way. The track layout on this old RAF base is easily seen on this aerial photograph taken in 1945, the perimeter roads being the layout of the circuit. At the top left and right hand corners at the ends of the runways are Woodcote and Copse corners, and the start line was before Woodcote Bend. Then clockwise from there, it's the left hand kink at Maggots, the right hander of Beckett's, another kink onto what we know now as the Hanger Straight, so Chapel, and then Stowe, Vale, Abbey, and back to Woodcote. A simple layout, and very quick. And Silverstone had hosted 3 Grand Prix prior to this in 1947, 48 and 49, and for this race it was given the title of the European Grand Prix because, well, reasons. 24 drivers were entered and each were assigned numbers based on a lottery, with only 7 and 13 not being given out. This might be being that in Western culture the number 7 is considered lucky and the number 13 is considered the opposite. And there are names on this entry list you might recognise, heroes of the time in some cases. Fangio, Farina, Fagioli, Reg Parnell, who later became a team manager with Aston Martin and BRM, and Louis Chiron. And now in the words of Simon Whistler, bonus fact, Reg Parnell is the only British driver to drive for Alfa Romeo in Formula 1 and was actually hand-picked by Alfa Romeo to, take part in this race alongside the likes of Fagioli, Fangio and Farina. No pressure then, old chap. The only team missing from this race was Ferrari. And you do get people online saying that Ferrari is the only team to have raced every single race in Formula 1, but this is actually not the case. Enzo had not sent any cars to Northamptonshire because of a row involving starting money. Now, starting money, or starting fees, is how the teams made their money prior to the world of sponsorship kicking off in the late 1960s, in addition to prize money. It was essentially teams being paid to race rather than the other way around, so it didn't matter if you won or came last, you got something. Entry fees probably did still exist, but there was this onus on the promoters and organisers to pay the drivers and teams for their time, and it's how they stayed in business before Colin Chapman painted his usually green Lotuses red and gold. It worked a little bit like how the world of professional wrestling works. Those who put more bums in seats get paid more, and the term in wrestling is called draw, from drawing a crowd. So at the height of the WWE's popularity in the late 1990s, performers like Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, The Undertaker, Triple H, Mankind and Kane would get paid more due to them being more over than guys like, who was a lower card wrestler at that time? The 2 blokes from 3 Minute Warning. Now we know how Enzo was. I am the best. My cars are the best. People are here to see my cars. It's not actually known how much the starting money was for this race. It's not known how much Alfa got compared to Maserati, or how much Maserati got compared to Talbot, or if they were just going to get the same, given it was the first ever official full-on World Championship race. Either way, Enzo decided he wasn't getting enough, and didn't send his cars or drivers to the event. Instead, Ferrari would make their World Championship debut at the next round in Monaco. But the event went ahead without Enzo's cars, and Alfa Romeo dominated qualifying, with the 4 drivers being side by side on the first row of the grid, because that's how they lined up in those days. It was like 4-3-4-3. Farina beat Fagioli by 0.2 of a second, with Fangio in 3rd and Parnell in 4th. In 5th, driving a Maserati, was Prince Bira of Siam, with his racing name just simply being B. Bira, or Bira. He was a member of the Thai royal family and was also a sailor and pilot, and I'm not going to try and pronounce his real name, but it's on your screen right now. And actually, aliases were not uncommon in these days, drivers entering under fake names to protect their identity from their parents or wives or other reasons. Between 150 and 200,000 people packed into Silverstone to watch this race, and at the start Farina converted his pole position, leading the other 3 Alphas away, and they started swapping positions to try and keep those in attendance entertained. It was definitely a show of what many at the time would have considered bravery and what we, knowing what modern racing is like, would call craziness. Straw bales were placed on the outsides and insides of the corners to define the track limits and try and slow the cars down if they spun off, and the drivers were ragging the life out of these things in helmets, goggles and polo shirts with no seatbelts. But either way, it was obvious that the Alphas were the class of the field, and it would take all 4 of them dropping out for anyone else to have a chance of taking the £1,000 prize for the winner. Parnell would later come around with a hole in his radiator grille, having smacked a rabbit that had run across the track in front of him. It didn't affect him much, but Chiron was in trouble. He'd got oil pouring out of his car and he came in to get all the fluids topped up. But then he retired as the problem became terminal. The same thing was happening to the Thai Prince, who was still able to keep going in 5th behind the 4 Alphas. But then the Prince stopped on the hangar straight, as while there was actually fuel in the tank, the fuel wasn't flowing to the engine. And while the other drivers slowly dropped out, it was the 4 Alphas leading the way, and the race had been quite the boring affair once they'd stopped swapping positions. Farina led Fangio, who was starting to close the gap, while Fagioli was about a second behind or so, and Parnell a bit further behind still. But on lap 62 of 70, Fangio's oil pipe broke, and that was the Argentine done for the day, which then promoted Parnell into the podium positions. Farina would lead Fagioli home as the first ever World Championship race winner, with Parnell managing to bring it home in 3rd. These were the only cars on the lead lap though, as the next driver, a Frenchman called Yves Giraud Cabanto, was 2 laps down on the Alphas at the end. An unwanted stat also lobbed in here that Leslie Johnson was the first man to retire from a World Championship race, and Farina was also given an extra point for the fastest lap, a point that stopped being handed out some point towards the end of the decade. Other points to note here are that Joe Fry and Brian Shaw-Taylor shared duties in their Maserati, and Tony Rold is the man who got absolutely leathered with Duncan Hamilton when they won the 1953 24 Hours of Le Mans. He was also one of a few drivers on the grid who were also soldiers or airmen during the war. And what would be a big event in Britain without the Royals? It's actually the only time a reigning monarch would be present at the British Grand Prix, and the Royal Box was basically a hastily cobbled together bit of scaffolding placed at Copse Corner. There are a few pictures around on the internet showing King George VI, the Queen Mother and Princess Margaret standing in this box watching the cars go by. But while she's not in any of the pictures, then Princess Elizabeth was also in attendance. 2 years later, her father would be gone, and she would wear the crown for the next 70 years until, well, yesterday, actually. But this race would serve as the first of over 1,000 Formula 1 World Championship races, of which there have been 771 individual drivers, 112 Grand Prix winners, and 34 drivers' champions. So then, a look back at the first ever Formula 1 World Championship race. If this has been all new information for you, then do give the video one of those like things. And if you want to see more, trips through the history books of motorsport or anything else I do here on this channel, then get subscribed and get that bell on as well, so you never miss out on anything I do here. Massive thanks to the kind folk at Patreon for the continued support, and if you want to help contribute to the image purchasing fund, you can help out by heading to the link in the description or click super thanks, and there's also links to Discord and socials in that description too. So until next time, I've been Aidan Millward. Have a great day wherever you live in the world, and I'll see you all again soon for another video. Or maybe tomorrow for a live stream, because I'm taking part in a Formula 4 racing championship thing with the lads from Lawrence de Soswa's community, the guys that I was doing the GT3 stuff with before, the Potato Nation thing. So I'll put the thing up for that a bit later so you can get your notifications and stuff like that. But if you don't want to watch that, I'll see you whenever the next video is. probably Monday. Goodbye.